Welcome to this really fabulous book reading with a twist. My very good friend and soul sister, Parmesh, has written a book called Queeristan. Highly recommend that everybody go out there and pick up a copy. This book is so important, in the current context of LGBTQ inclusion in the workspace. But it's not just; it's so much more than just a business book. It's a part memoir. It's a chronicle of pretty much all the things that have happened in terms of LGBTQ inclusion in the last 10 years through the lens of this queerly fabulous person, Parmesh. And, so we're kind of here today with Radhika and Zainab. And we're going to basically be doing a little bit of a reading where we're going to read bits about each other that Parmesh has written so nicely on us. And therefore, I hope you enjoy. It's just a little sneak peek. We're not going to read massive parts of the book so that you go out there and buy a copy. So I'm going to hand it over to Parmesh, and then we can start.
Thank you so much, Keshav, for this. Thank you, Radhika. Thank you, Zainab. Thank you to the entire Keshav Suri Foundation team, It Gets Better India, for actually making this happen, to Richa for suggesting this wonderful format of, it reminded me of Kho in school where you tag someone and then that person runs and then you tag someone. And given that we're all in lockdown, we thought this serial passing the book onwards and we each read each other's bits would be a fun way to, bring this book into the world. So since Keshav has tagged me first, I'm going to read out a bit about Radhika, and then, Radhika, you read out, and then so on. So this is a bit about Radhika, which Radhika actually did not want me to put in the book. But of course, I did. And it's great fun. And here goes. It's in a chapter called LGBTQ Inclusion Can Make You Money. So I'll give you just a very brief overview of the book beforehand. The book has 5 sections. The first section is very, very personal. It talks about my own journey as a queer person, little bit about, growing up and things like that, but very much about me at Godrej and the past 10 or 20 years of my life where I've been doing the kind of different things that I've been doing. And the methods that I've used to bring about the change, both at Godrej as well as in other companies. And I introduce frameworks like jugaad resistance and cultural acupuncture in this section to give you a sense of how you can kind of place yourself within the system as well and bring about immense amounts of change. And this is actually something that all of us in this little mini book club of us have done, right? We're all part of the corporate world in some way or the other, in different capacities, but we're all also activists imagining and then co-creating a better future. Part 2 gives us a context of what it means to be queer in India. And I thought that was important because a lot of business books kind of just go direct into the case studies and into the whys and the how-tos without telling you who we're talking about. And I thought for everyone reading, straight people as well as queer people ourselves, so many of us don't know our multiple histories. So many of us might not know the range of terms that we use for ourselves. So many of us might not be familiar with the law, right? And there were so many judgments, not just 377, but also the NALSA judgment or the right to privacy judgment, etc., that affect us. So I thought that it was very important that I give you this context. And the last bit of that is about how important families are to us. And, you know, I talk about so much, you know, but so many of our stories also come into that. And then the third and fourth bits are the more businessy part of the book, where I talk about how inclusion makes you money, makes you more innovative, you know, attracts talent and so on. And then the last bit is a, you know, step-by-step approach on how you can be inclusive. So this bit that I'm reading about Radhika is in part 3 of the book, and it talks about how LGBTQ inclusion can make you money. In July 2019, I was in Radhika Piramal's apartment in Worli's Pochkanwala Road, a discreet, leafy part of the city where many of our billionaires stay. Radhika had an intimate wedding in 2011 with 120 family members and friends in London. And now she and her American wife, Amanda, live between their London home and this Worli apartment in Mumbai. At the entrance of the apartment, there was a gorgeous wall-sized charcoal portrait of the vintage Bollywood star Leela Chitnis, one of the earliest works by the New York-based queer artist Chitra Ganesh, who I adore, and who is best friends with my dear friend DJ Rekha. Yes, we are all interconnected in this queer global world, and this is how the pink economy churns. As an art lover myself, I reveled in the queer energy in the room. Radhika and Amanda have been building up their collection of strong feminist women artists over the years. A Minam Apang mountain peak hung over the marble backlit bar to my right. Radhika was in the kitchen, heating up some palak paneer and kali dal, along with aloo gobi and a nice Rajasthani gatte ki curry that her mother had sent them. As we settled down to eat, we reminisced about how many years we had known each other. Radhika was doing her MBA at Harvard when I was at MIT. And she even attended the big party with the community group Masala as part of the South Asian LGBTQ film festival I had organized in 2004. She was closeted then, so she hadn't come up to me and had exited the party quietly. Now, of course, Radhika is far from closeted. As the first out and proud lesbian vice chairperson of a major Indian company, VIP Industries, she is the most powerful queer person in Indian business. In fact, her own public coming out happened at the Culture Lab stage in 2015, at the event Breaking Free, Life Gets Better Together. LGBT, get it? We're all about these acronyms. She leapt right from there to the front page. Since then, she's been forthcoming in talking about her sexuality in public, be it while delivering the keynote at the Chief Marketing Officer Summit of India in 2017, or at a panel discussion on the road ahead for LGBTQ inclusion at the Ananta Aspen Summit in 2019. Just like with my boss Nisa, when Radhika talks, people listen. Godrej, Piramal, these dynastic Indian family business names go a long way in our country, and they help overcome acceptance barriers. This is not so different from other countries such as the US, where company CEOs carry enormous clout. So when people like the Apple CEO Tim Cook declares publicly in a 2014 opinion piece in Bloomberg Businessweek, "I'm proud to be gay and I consider being gay amongst the greatest gifts God has given me," it really shifts the needle of acceptance. At the launch of our Godrej Trans Manifesto in 2018, Radhika was in the front row when I presented a case study on how VIP's profits jumped from 660 million rupees to 880 million rupees after she came out as lesbian. I have a theory I told my audience that day. We queers saw that Radhika was one of us, and we went out and bought more suitcases and backpacks. Then I showed some slides of VIP's share price going up and speculated about us queers huddled and muddled, calling brokers to buy more of the company's shares. I tell the story at every talk I give, and it always gets me lots of laughs. Come out, I nudge the CEOs of companies I visit. Be like Radhika. Your profits will increase and your share price will go up. Of course, it's a stretch, and I know it, but I'm still talking about it in this book because my theory is very much in line with what research suggests. The New York-based Center for Talent Innovation found in its research of US companies in 2013 that consciously talking about diversity and inclusion makes an organization 45% more likely to increase its market share. Secondly, as one of the senior most people in our company, when she came out, Radhika did not have the additional baggage of trying to hide who she was. The 2019 report from Community Business, LGBT plus workplace inclusion in India, cites Stonewall, Sir Ian McKellen's organization. Concealing sexual orientation at work reduces productivity by up to 30%. Coming out frees your mental bandwidth to be productive without worrying about the consequences of hiding your sexuality. This too has a premium. When I pointed this out to Radhika, she simply did a cute little Indian head wiggle and smile. Some more palak paneer. This is why I'm here, Radhika. Sorry, but I am going to continue using your story as a case study in all my presentations. And yes, in fact, I would love some more palak paneer. Thank you. So I'm going to end right here and tag you, Radhika. And thank you for that evening. And I'm glad it made it in the book. And I'm glad that we're reading it right now.
Thanks, Parmesh, for inviting me to be part of this book. It's so important. I've really had such a great joy in reading it, and I'm so proud of you and the journey you've made for yourself and for countless others. You've been a great influence on myself, on Keshav. I think many of us have taken big, bold steps after seeing you sort of shine the light. I'm very grateful for it. Thank you, Parmesh. So with that, let me take this opportunity to read a little about my dear friend Keshav, who has been an amazing pioneer for the Indian LGBT movements in more ways than one. But let me not take Parmesh's words. Let me just speak from Parmesh's book. Okay. It was the day after Rise, India's first LGBTQ job fair. I was at the Lalit in Bengaluru. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and Keshav Suri had just come down from his suite in bright red pajamas, an electric blue Isimiyaki pleated trench, and oversized rainbow-framed dark glasses. Honey, you don't want to see me in the morning without my makeup, trust me. It felt weird interviewing him formally after having known him for all these years. Come on, focus, he scolded me. This book is important. So now, listen to Keshav in his own words. We have 15 hotels inside and outside India. My journey towards inclusion began with my own family being very supportive of me as a gay person. Over the years, I realized that I should use my position to do something more for the community. There were 2 triggers. The first reason is actually you, Parmesh. When you called me to Godrej for the UN's Standards of Conduct for Business launch, I was very motivated that if one of India's oldest business groups can do something like this, what is stopping the rest of us? The second reason was one of my own employees, Hamza, who transitioned to Mahi. Witnessing this, I became aware of how important representation is for our community. Mahi wanted to be seen, and I realized I also wanted people from the LGBT community to be seen and represented at all Lalit properties. Over the years, we rapidly hired more and more LGBTQ people as Lalit staff. As of June 2019, we have 35 trans people working with us out of 66 LGBTQ employees overall. When I checked with Keshav again in March, this is Parmesh, in March 2020, just before submitting the final draft of the book, I was happy to hear that Lalit's LGBTQ employee count has gone up to 100. Keshav starts again. We are also working at intersectional inclusion. So we have a trans acid attack survivor, for instance, or a queer DJ who happens to be disabled. We have created an ecosystem for queer performers through Kitty Sue. Right from our very own Lalit Bangalore employee, Alex, who becomes Maya, the drag queen, when he performs on the Kitty Sue stage, a performance space under the Lalit label, to so many others. We have empowered more than 40 queer artists to perform on the Kitty Sue stage. We have launched a scholarship worth 1.5 lakh rupees each for 5 trans students to cover all the costs for a diploma in food production and bakery at the Lalit Suri Hospitality School. We are just getting started, by the way. There's a lot more we are going to do. So, who do I tag now? Keshav? It has to be Keshav. Keshav, over to you, dear Keshav.
Radhika, goosebumps. I mean, and especially hearing you read it it's really, made me so emotional. Of course, Parmesh's words are so eloquent and so beautifully the way he's put all and interwoven all our stories. Of course, we're mentioned a lot more in the book. You also, Zainab also. It's all over the book, but the way he's sort of brought us in, and then not just us, but all the, I think, queer people that have made a mark in the movement of queer rights in India, I think is just so beautiful. And thank you, Radhika. Thank you also for being a beacon of light for myself. Thank you for being my co-chair on the FICCI D&I task force. And just thank you for just being you. And of course, this goes to Parmesh and Zainab. So I'm going to now read a passage about Zainab, who happens to be not just a dear friend, but also somebody that I can call and message, and she'll be like, okay, shut up. You're going a little all over the place. Come back in here. It's one of those sort of people in my life that, who'll tell me as it is. And I think that there are very few people that you meet in your life that can, be direct, upfront, and at the same time, exceedingly loving and caring. And two of those people are actually on this panel, which is Radhika and Zainab. So if you permit me, I'm going to read the parts of Zainab. Okay, so I want to end this chapter with some cautionary thoughts from Zainab Patel. I've known her for much before she transitioned into this gorgeous diva whose status updates and pout pictures I wait for eagerly and watched with pride as she worked with Humsafar Trust. Will you do a pout later for us, Zainab? Then joined the UN and blazed a trail of success with the UNDP in Bangkok. When she wanted to leave Bangkok and return to India, she interviewed with us at Godrej for a D&I role. She was liked by all who interviewed her, but it was ultimately decided that since she came from a development sphere, she might not have the corporate chops needed. She was understandably frustrated. With corporations, the problem is that they say that they don't mind hiring trans people and the LGBTQIA+ folks if they match a particular competency. What is there for them to mind? It is not like trans people are alien, just a set of marginalized people who need to come to the mainstream. You make changes in policy to accommodate people from socio-economically marginalized communities, even if they are not as technically competent, because you wanted to see certain kinds of people in certain positions. I did D&I all my life. It is just that the way they articulated D&I in the development sector is different from the way the corporate sector sees it. If you have to have trans inclusion, women empowerment, Dalit empowerment, you will have to get us into positions of power. Even in a straightforward thinking institution, they will have to take a chance and get people in, to bring in a different class of individuals who would add value to the institutional arrangement and help it become more organic. How are you going to add elements of diversity if you stick to rigid rules that are archaic? This is a question corporate India should ask itself in order to recruit a diverse set of individuals. Should you stick to rigid rules, or should you do business beyond the usual? I share Zainab's position. This is now Parmesh speaking. I share Zainab's position on positive discrimination. As she told me, positive discrimination has to happen. There is no other way. We have been positively discriminated for women of late because for about every waking year of mankind, there was positive discrimination for men. Even with all the right policies and language, workplace equality for women is still not a practice. 33% reservation in parliament is still a distant dream. 33% hiring is still a distant dream for just about every corporate. Imagine an LGBT population, which is 5% of the population. How much more time will it take to bring in workplace equality? Till the time we have legislation backing this, you will have to have policies which explicitly, positively discriminate for the marginalized. Some months after this chat, Zainab told me that she had joined KPMG as their head of diversity. Chalo, not Godrej. This is Parmesh, of course. It is Chalo and Na. But at least someone else took the leap of faith. I felt happy for her, but was regretful that it wasn't us at Godrej. She told me that the next 5 years would be a litmus test. And I want all of you hearing this now, but reading this, including my own colleagues at Godrej, to pay attention to the next few lines from Zainab. Are companies recruiting, providing these benefits? Are people's lives changing? What are we able to change societal norms? These are Zainab's words. You could have the most inclusive policy and do nothing about it. You could have a Parmesh actively recruiting and also match that by having at least a few positions in your senior management for which you indicate that you are looking for LGBTQIA leadership, because that will send a certain message across. Only then will you be able to say that these policy recommendations have been successful. Otherwise, it's just talk. I couldn't agree with Zainab more. This is Parmesh, but I personally as well couldn't agree with Zainab more. It's time to walk the talk. Dear HR managers, hire more of us across all levels of your organization. So with that, I'm gonna tag Zainab, because honestly, this was really powerful what you just said here, Zainab.
I actually want to draw your attention to a revolutionary LGBTIQ leader from the US. And probably a lot of you have heard about him, read about him, seen perhaps a movie on him. And what he says is very interesting, is that he says gay men, but I'm kind of extrapolating it to the entire LGBTIQ community. And he says that we will not win our rights by staying quietly in our closets. And I'm going to use that basically to pitch start this, the few pages that I'm going to be reading from Parmesh's story, actually, where he talks about visibility and the need for it. For queer students, my presence and my openness on campus is often transformational. I think I have a parallel profession as an honorary founder of many LGBTQ clubs in MBA college campuses across the country. In August 2015, I helped launch Ally, the LGBTQ Students Association of IIM Ahmedabad. 2 years later, in August 2017, I was hanging out with the students of Ummeed, the LGBTQ Association of IIM Kozhikode, on their Verdant campus. They told me that they were inspired to start Ummeed after my Godrej loud talk to them in 2016. A student at that 2016 talk had just stood in a corner and stared at me without saying a word. During my 2017 visit, she mustered up the courage to come up to me and told me that over the past year, she had come out as a lesbian and I was now confident of herself. In August 2019, I was at IIM Trichy, helping kickstart PRISM, their LGBTQ Students Association, in the midst of my Godrej Loud visit. All IIM campuses are blessed with loads of land, but the Trichy one, the newest, felt like it was from another planet altogether. Because of its central attraction, the futuristic, spaceship-like Learning Resource Center, a library building with a finance lab, a behavioral science lab, and a daycare center for kids. The newly formed Prism Club members met me at the entrance of the campus, and as they walked me to the auditorium, they excitedly told me about their plans for the year. As far as loud presentations go, what I witnessed next was special. Even before I entered the auditorium, an installation of 100 of paper cranes greeted me. What a sight it must be. About 40 students burst into a Nukkad Natak that ended up them shouting in unison, loud, loud, loud. As I opened the door of the auditorium, 20 students exploded into a Bollywood song and dance routine on stage. The Aak Matke remix, if you please. And they were then joined by 20 more from among the students who were seated. Soon we were all dancing. Imagine that. Then there was classical music performance, followed by fusion dance and a rock music performance. By the time I finally got to speak, we were 1 hour into the session. But who cares when you're having so much fun? Loud for these students was a chance to unleash the talent they had kept bottled up for pretty much all of their lives. Some version of this grand welcome happens at every college. The students do this for Godrej each year and for no other company. There is only one word for this: love. We show students that we care about them, and they in turn respond with so much love that we cannot help but burst into song and dance on campus with them. Each campus I go to, I make it a point to ask, how many LGBTQ students and professors are there in the audience? Please raise your hands. Do you know how many hands went up in Trichy in 2019? 9. This was the highest I've ever seen. 9 confident students willing to share their identity with their peers in a second-tier city in southern Tamil Nadu. Then I ask, how many people in the audience support LGBTIQ equality? Raise your hands. In Trichy, all hands were up in the air. And I actually want to end with something of my own, if I have the permission to speak. You know, what Parmesh has written is actually the heart of this entire page that I read was the importance of visibility. And the first step to solving bigger ills of homophobia and transphobia, it serves us all to remember Harvey's words again and his bravery and how we build a better world for each other. Thank you, Parmesh.
Thank you, everyone. It just felt, I had like goosebumps hearing all your voices talk about the different parts of the book, because you write it, you know, it's the past couple of years, and actually the past decade, I would say, has been one of accumulating these experiences, right? All of which were poured into this book. And then to finally hear it aloud is quite something. So thank you. I wish we were all together so that we could have hugged, but we're going to keep that for later. So yeah, I really, I want to open up to a discussion with all of you. And then Zainab, let's start from that last bit about visibility, right? Because a lot of, it's exactly what you said. in the bit that Keshav read about you, or Radhika read about you? Keshav read about you, right? About how when you...
I read about it.
Yeah. Also about how important it is to be across every level of the company and be seen in visible positions of power. And this is what I really love what Keshav is doing, right? He's not hiring token queer people and putting them in the back office, right? If you go to any Lalit property, queer people are everywhere. They greet you at the entrance. They're at every level, every position. And that visibility itself, I mean, there's so much, you know, for hotel guests, for other employees, for, you know, for the general public at large. Does anyone want to talk about this process of being visible? And Radhika, maybe you, because I know it was a struggle for you.
Yeah, thanks, Parmesh. In fact, I do want to share, because as I was reading your book, the one thing that really struck me is the difference in confidence level between me today at, you know, 40 something in age versus my confidence level back in 2004 when I bumped into you at that masala party and didn't really introduce myself properly because I was scared. And so that, what a big change. And in fact, what was the reason for that change? Two very specific things happened to me. One is I went to, in Harvard Business School, there was a very, very popular professor, and she was lesbian and she was out. And yet she was so much admired by the entire student body. And then I worked for Bain & Company, a consulting firm. And there they had a very strong Be Glad network, a buddy system, an employee resource group. And they had out gay partners who are the most senior people in the firm. And you know, yes, it was North America, you know, in the 15 years ago, but I carried that with me, and that has given me the motivation to be out myself and to join, you know, Zainab and Keshav and Parmesh and all these, what we call visibility efforts or normalization efforts. It's just so important. And I feel it's the least I can do. Like, it's my duty to do it. That's how I feel.
I remember you told me about how you came out to your own company employees. You want to share that with everyone?
Sure. I mean, I got married in the UK where it was legal in 2011. And somehow the news of this marriage, this wedding party, got leaked somehow in the Indian tabloid press. So Mumbai Mirror ran a short story, Dear Diary, very VIP wedding in London. And when I went, it was a big thing. And when I went to office that day, I was like, oh my God, something's going to happen. I drove, when I got into office, the watchman was reading the newspaper. Okay. I thought, oh my God. And so then I went up to the cabin, and first person who wanted to meet me was my head of marketing. And he said, Radhika, now what is this? Is it true? What do I do? Because the PR companies are all calling me. So I said, yes, it's just true. And just tell them it's true and no further comment while I figure out the rest. And then, in fact, after that, nothing bad happened. It was just a silly story. That time, and back then in 2011, you know, even Facebook and all was not so popular what it is now. So it didn't get picked up anywhere. But Parmesh then approached me later that year, or, you know, a year later. And he said, look, Radhika, now you're out anyway. Why don't you change the narrative? Instead of a small, silly Mumbai Mirror story, why don't you take control of the narrative and do something good with that? Because you do have a name. And if you speak, then, you know, maybe your newspaper articles will pick it up. And that's how I went on to, you know, giving interviews a lot with Economic Times, that has always been supportive of this cause. So that's how that sort of public outing happened. But what happened after the public outing is nothing bad happened to me, my business, my company, my family. All those fears went away.
Yeah, and the data actually, you know, supports this as well, right? So we did something with FICCI last year. And there was a report released at FICCI as well. I think it was Out and Equal and BCG and FICCI. And even in countries that are homophobic, when companies go out and be inclusive, they found that there is zero. It affects them. There is no negative effect on revenue, on reputation, etc.
But I want to add one thing, that does depend on the culture of the country. And so this is where our normalization and visibility efforts do matter. In fact, I wanted to ask Keshav a question, if it's okay, which is when, you know, you very publicly, you're out yourself, you're part of the Supreme Court petition, then you've started hiring more people publicly other than yourself in the Lalit group. Has there been any negativity from either employees or customers?
And there were some who were just like, you know, we always knew. And it was a very sort of a family kind of moment. Like you would get a reaction from the family. And I think the reason I did it was because I was dating Cyril and we were together for quite some time. And we were, of course, very visibly a couple when we would enter the hotel together, or we would party together. And, that time it was 24/7, then later Kirisu. And it was, I never hid from, my display of affection. And of course, Cyril's French, so, they love public display of affection. So I think that, my team was seeing that. So I just said that, okay, let's just address it now so that we put that to rest and to aside, and then let's focus on maybe my work and what I'm contributing to the business. When I did, there was no negative feedback or negative connotation within my team. When I did publicly file the writ, I must say that the media was exceedingly supportive. And I have to say also my customers, it was beautiful. They were really gung-ho about the inclusion and the steps of inclusion that the Lalit was taking. It kind of took the Lalit from, an old school brand into the 21st century. And even at Kirisu, when I did all of these amazing nights with drag artists, trans artists, there was never a sort of massively negative feedback. Of course, social media is there, and yes, people do write things. When my videos were going on YouTube and when they went on Facebook, yes, there were some very very nasty comments, which I guess is now become a sort of norm. And but I must say that there were a few compared to the real positive comments that came about. And of course, we know the life of a nightclub is barely 4 to 5 years, but now Kirisu is on his 9th year, is moving to a digital age. And a lot of that is actually to do with my queer community and them supporting the Lalit and Kirisu. So I'm going to focus on the fact that it was mainly positive. And, of course, sometimes here and there you have a bit of negativity, but like I said, we're thick-skinned in the hospitality industry. But taking a cue from that, Radhika, I want to ask Zainab a question, and I want to basically, Zainab, coming to what has been written in the book, and it's so powerful, the sort of language that has been used, through Parmesh and through you. It's a big, powerful message, and I want to ask you that: do you think that since the verdict of 377 and NALSA, has corporate India changed? Has it gone from having just policies on paper to actually visible? And of course, I understand the Lalit is an example, but that's because I made it a point that I have visibility in every decision-making thing. Also because all my team members took an equality pledge, all 3,500 of them, they signed an equality pledge where they said they will not discriminate on basis of sexual orientation, caste, religion. And it was beautifully taken, even when I had, team members transition and then went and hired transition. I must say my team, there was a little bit of hesitation in the beginning. And I'll tell you, the hesitation was basically, are we going to offend the community? Am I saying the right thing or not, or the wrong thing? And that was the only hesitation. Other than that, I think sometimes the language got a little confusing. There's so many letters, LGBTQIA+. So I felt that, some of the HR team members also didn't get that. But I think that Parmesh, you've sort of explained so beautifully in the book what is what. So I think all the people who have that doubt should read the book. But other than that, there was not much at the Lalit. But having said that, is it the same for the rest of corporate India? Have we taken steps forward or not? And I would love to hear what you think, Zainab.
A very interesting question, Keshav. And maybe I'll be partial to the work that I do as a D&I thought leader, and take the liberty of actually saying that a lot has changed on the ground. So what started off as a conversation on gay men then started becoming gay men and trans people. And I think corporate India today, for a large part, at least people who are working from the multinational space, and also a lot of the Indian corporates today talk about the entire alphabet soup as an LGBTIQ, and they do understand the differences about what it means to be a lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans person, intersex, as well as a queer individual. And all of the vocabulary that we kind of use in our day-to-day language in terms of creating a more equilateral space for everyone who chooses to identify differently is somewhere creeping into the office lingo as well. So I think that has changed. Corporates have done a fair job of pinkwashing in the last 2 years, piggybacking on the Section 377 judgment, and unfortunately, not so much on the Nalsa judgment though, because I would have seen Nalsa judgment really paving way for a lot of trans equity rather than equality. Unfortunately, that wasn't a big takeoff, but now that the government of India has passed the Protection of Transgender Persons Act, and it will be seen as legal compliance, so everyone worth their penny would actually be pulling up their socks and trying to be seen as doing something. But let me take a step back, Keshav, and tell you a simple story about me. So, for a person like me, when it comes to visibility, I was not your regular off-the-mill trans person begging on the street who needed to get a better job. So I am educated, and I didn't bring in a certain level of experience. But I think when it comes to getting the entire corporate jobs with, like the way Parmesh mentioned in his book, is something that requires a leap of faith. And it's not about sourcing the right talent, but taking a leap of faith. Because while a lot of people talk about LGBTIQ, equality at the workplace, and we go to almost a dozen of those events throughout the year, everyone talks such fabulous words about how they want you to bring their entire selves to work. But when you see them actually working on it, what is it? I mean, today we look at policies. Yes, same-sex insurance is there. Gender-affirming care is there for some corporates. Some people talk about non-discrimination at the workplace. But is that all for LGBTIQ people? What about primary caregiving responsibility? What about parental leave, or the fact that you might want to look at other spousal benefits? Or what if I just want to look at my employee journey map within the organization to see what is going to be the glass ceiling for an LGBTIQ person, and what is it that they can achieve over the so with 30% interview pool candidates being women, at least that at some point of time with 30, 40, 46%, I mean KPMG is currently 46% diversity. So we still look at it from a very proud perspective that we do well on the gender diversity space. But if I were to say just a single trans person in all of KPMG globally who's a director, it is a sense of achievement. But it also tells me that lots more needs to be done in the corporate space if you want to get queer icons to come out and be the visibles, and also be in some way idols for somebody else who comes in from a historically marginalized background. Because when you're taking queer visible people, you're bringing stories of marginalization to the front. Language-based discrimination, caste-based discrimination, ethnicity-based discrimination, religion-based discrimination. And I think we queer people have this amazing ability to storytell, and we actually become the flag bearers for a lot of communities once we become visible. So I think the issue about visibility for LGBTIQ within management, mid-management to senior management is still very far off. There are few visible. It's like that dialogue from Sisters Act where the priest says, welcome few but faithful, and it's just like that, the few faithful people who will stand up and become visible. But year after year you see the same kind of faces, you see the same Radhika, you see me, you see Parmesh, you see yourself, and we look at it as a challenge that year after year we need to make the investment to bring more people to come to the front. How much of that actually will corporate giants take it up as a challenge and implement it over a 5-year period, and whether the management takes it on themselves to be held responsible for bringing up LGBTIQ from a visibility perspective and from an accountability perspective? That is still something that needs terrible work as we go ahead.
Yeah, Radhika.
Yeah, I just want to add here. I think Parmesh's book brings this tension out perfectly, which is the tension between taking pride in what we've achieved so far and also understanding the long journey ahead. And, that's why it has so many chapters that explain stories of people we know. And this book could not have been written 10 years ago, but also that part 5, which is that very practical to-do guide. And the only way we will get some new faces onto these screens is if we get our straight allies to keep doing the good work and to feel for it as strongly as we do. And that isn't, as we can see from all the civil rights movements or all the misogyny and racism which persists across all cultures of the world, not just India. It's a long fight. It's a long journey. It has to keep going. So that energy is required, I think, even without the statistics changing very fast. We have to keep that energy.
I absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more, Radhika, and what you said, Zainab. Here is where I would also then like to plug some of the work that we're doing with FICCI. And they're, taking that, because FICCI, of course, these are, and Zainab said this before also, these are homegrown, Indian companies who are ready to now have conversations and go further in the whole diversity and inclusion aspect, which we chair and co-chair, and now we've got 3 subgroups as well. I also think that it's brilliant that they've come on board as industry partners for their Workplace Equality Index, which focuses only on LGBT inclusion, LGBTQI plus inclusion at the workspace in corporate India. So I think that these are steps for Indian companies in particular to be recognizing the LGBTQ community as a whole together in the corporate space. What really warmed my heart was when we had a lesbian couple who stayed in, who had adopted a child, and them, Parmesh, they actually came via reference from you, and they said that it's the first time we actually came to a hotel in India where we've said we are the mothers of the child and not the mother and aunt. And I thought that really, I think, put all if there was any backlash, just completely away.
Well, that's the point, right? 200, I mean, that's the number in the book. $200 billion is the Indian queer economy. And you moved fast, Keshav, and you're getting a large chunk of it. I mean, not these days, but hopefully, once all of this is over. So it's not just, it's not just a nice thing to do for these queer people. It's also like eminently sensible, right? We are a market also.
I have a question. Sorry, Kat. I have a question for Parmesh, actually, which is, Parmesh, you've been to so many companies now and you've spoken to so many companies. You've also been to so many universities. You talked about your IIM experience. Why is it that it's still so conservative in companies compared to universities? Can you talk about that? Because even university faculty are conservative in India.
So I'll tell you why. And I write about this in the book as well. I think in companies, whenever you try to introduce any element of change and you present, there's always one person at the table, and it tends to be an older man who will stand up and say this dialogue. And the dialogue goes, let me play devil's advocate for a minute. I don't see students saying this at all. When you introduce ideas to students, they're like, this is cool, this is interesting. I have, this one is queer, this one is this, one is there. Companies are populated by older men, even in like really, and nothing against older men. Many people like older men. I'm 44. Soon I will become an older man, or maybe for some people I am an older man. But I'm saying when there's around the table, right? That's the point, right? So even in well-meaning companies, right? Like I'm envious that Zainab has KPMG, which is 46% women. Most companies are not like that. I shudder to ask you what what the ratio is at VIP. At Godrej,
no, I know the answers. It's very depressing.
Not good. I think anything less than 50% is not good. So, but so many companies that I know of speak with great pride. We reached 12% women diversity. You know, we were 4% some years ago. Okay, 12 is better than 4, but it's not ideal. So senior leaders tend to be these older men, and they tend to preserve the status quo, right? This is how hegemony maintains itself, right? Any kind of hegemony, in this case, it's patriarchy, it's men's control over boardrooms and people's lives, everyone's bodies, and so on, right? You maintain, you perpetrate yourself by maintaining the status quo, because any element of change, you fear that it could bring you down. So corporates, when we see more, which is why this book is revolutionary, because it wants to inject this change in corporates, right? The moment we see more and more people, the moment Zainab is in a decision-making role, Zainab is going to put that toe in the door and widen it open. And, you know, there will be a range of wonderful people who will come in, who will help the company, who will make it innovative, make it more money, make it beautiful. It'll go up the, you know, every ranking possible. Who is scared of that, right? These older men are scared who want to play devil's advocate, because suddenly what will happen to them? So our role has to be twofold, right? We have to work, I think, with a lot of young college students, leaders, etc., and say, here is the benefit. But I think one of the things that we aren't doing, and I want to do more of, is work with these insecure, older men who are in positions of power, saying that when we want to be included, we are not going to take anything away from you. You don't have to fear. Opening the door to us is not going to take your position away. It's what Mona El-Tahawi says, this the incredible feminist author whom I love and whom I cite in the book so much, right? So we have to stop thinking of this as one small cake. And, you know, the men are trying to, like, whoever, people in power trying to hold on to this cake. And we are saying we want one small piece of it, and then we're all fighting. We have to tell everyone, let's bake a bigger cake and let's all eat bigger pieces of it.
That's very, very sort of eloquently said, Parmesh. But I think this is a question that I'm going to pose to both Radhika and Zainab. And then after that, Parmesh, you can wrap up. Or if there's anything that we missed out, team KSF or Richa, you can tell us what to throw in. But I think that, you know, the conversation about men in power and also then trickle that down to, because the LGBTQ community is a sort of microcosm of what's, you know, going on in the world. Do you feel that a lot of the times, even for, and you brought this up a little bit, Zainab, but I want you to go into a little bit further detail, even for the LGBTQIA plus community, is it the gay men that are hogging the conversation, and therefore these policies that are going down into the companies are more suited towards just the G part of the LGBTQIA plus community? And you know, and your own personal experiences in our community, especially in the intersectionality of our community. I'd like to hear a little bit from you guys, if that's okay.
So I had a slightly different take to it, and I actually very strongly believe that patriarchy is the root cause for both misogyny and transphobia. And a lot of people from within our community, whether they are gay men or other men who have sex with men, or for that matter, other parts of the LGBTIQ community, who actually reinforce these stereotypes. While we've mostly modeled on a Western white model of LGBTIQ activism, I think for a lot of people like you, me, Radhika, Parmesh in India, we've come up with an own ethnic hybrid model of what we think is going to be the best way forward for LGBTIQ inclusion at workplaces in India. So starting off with simple things which may seem simple but sends out a very powerful message is code of conduct inquiries and anti-discrimination policies. You know, a lot of people think that, oh, that's really a soft topic and it's easy to just put up an anti-discrimination. But the fact is that the moment you have something like that in the organization, whether someone is an out and proud gay man, someone is a closeted person, someone is an exploring person, or someone is just square and doesn't want to fit into any of the bracket, you're sending out a very positive signal. Yes, I do agree for in a lot of personal experiences in the development sector as well as the private sector, that there is a tendency for articulate gay men to kind of how would I put it, to kind of overshadow the discourse. And very rightly so, a lot of people also feel that trans women are now kind of trying to claim back those spaces. Well, as I mean, it's going to be a long journey for LBT women to kind of, because one is again dealing with the patriarchy and misogynist mindset in the mainstream society as well as within communities to actually find place at the table and be equitable in the voices that are going out. It's actually a very, very long battle, Keshav. Personally seen it in the development sector in the UN. I can very confidently, now that I'm out of it, talk some of the most misogynist and trans and homophobic comments actually come out from people who are white, gay, and proud. I might be hated for this, but that's the truth.
I really want to agree with Zainab. Absolutely agree with you that patriarchy is the sort of root cause for the misogyny and for sexism and for transphobia, homophobia. And I think we can, and we see that in the Western prison, that's how it's happened, right? The white gay men have ruled the roost. We can feel good that we have an opportunity in India to change it a bit. And, I think Parmesh's lead is a great example. I mean, Parmesh has made it a point, I will say, for the last 5 years, maybe 7 years, to ensure that the panels he holds, or the events he organizes, he shares the stage. And so that's great that we've had this leader like Parmesh, who's been a good voice. And how can Parmesh and Keshav and others ensure that all the different forums within the LGBT activist space in India have that? So because, there's a sort of corporate inclusion space which we are in, but there's so many other spaces, right? There's community activism, okay, there's legal representation, all of these things. So that's one thing I think we can and should do and make our Indian model different from the others. Because I do think it's the issue. And I think, being a lesbian woman, I often say that for me, I will any day talk about gender equality and feminism almost more than LGBTQ, because I feel if you can resolve that big thing, then many things also improve along with it. And it's easier to get people more engaged because there's 50% women,
Radhika,
and so it's a way to go. On one more thing I would like to add on the practical aspect now of actually making change, okay? So because the numbers are the numbers in terms of representation is painfully slow, including at my own company VIP. So what I see it in two parts. There's hiring and there's retention, okay? And hiring will take time because especially now post-COVID, hiring is slow, right? And one is not going to fire people because they are a certain demographic if they're doing their job well. So hiring, even if we put in quotas for, let's say, 30% women, or if we take out, names so that we can remove ageism, casteism, we can do so many things, but that all is predicated on a lot of additional hiring, which looks very difficult in the economic year ahead. So then we are talking about retention or the existing culture in a company. There, I have found the most helpful thing is via the route of posh training. If we can just overall have a much more sensitive and educational discussion on inclusion and diversity, that is something that no company can get away from because everybody has to do the posh training. So that's my sort of only practical advice to any HR head who might be seeing this.
That's just so practical, so beautiful. I do want to get back to what you and Zainab were talking about earlier, which is also why I kind of end the book with the section that it does, right? Because it starts with personal journey, gives you context, it tells you why and how. But I think the solution to so many, whether it's patriarchy or whether it is the dissonances within the queer movement itself, in terms of who has spoken for who for so many years, can be found by looking at the young queer movements that are taking place across the country. And I think a lot of us in corporate India can learn from that. But a lot of us in Indian society can also learn from that, right? Because if you look at the most exciting things that are happening in India at this point are not happening in the big cities. They're happening in the Jabalpurs and the Raipurs. They're happening in the Manipurs. They're happening in all over this country, whether it's organizations, whether it's cultural festivals, whether it is people and the stories of acceptance. And some of the most progressive, forward-looking queer activism that is coming up is intersectional. So whether it is Dalit Queer Project, whether it is Queer Muslim Project, whether it's Chinky Homo Project, and these are just a few of the so many incredible youth-powered queer future movements that we are seeing. So I think to learn, and I think this is something that a lot of us, and every social movement, right? People who've been doing this for years, we've all been now doing this for 10, 15 years or something, right? We need to really look at the generation which is younger than us and learn from them. And at least what I've tried to do is, my hope comes from that, right? It doesn't come from the mostly old men occupying places of power and corporate boardrooms. They will go someday. They'll have to go. It comes from looking at where do the young want to take our India, right? And how can we be, in a sense, this conduit between these dreams and aspirations of young queer India, which are plural, secular, intersectional, which understand that we cannot have a better queer India if we have an India in which climate change has ruined us, right? So our struggle for queer rights has to be alongside our struggle for environment. What point in fighting for queer equality if we are so casteist, right? So the anti-caste movement has to walk hand in hand with the queer rights movement, and so on and so forth, right? So I think young India understands this. I think it would do all of us really well to like kind of understand and learn from that. I mean, at least, which is also why I chose to end the book by focusing on that.
Now tell us where we can get the book, Parmesh.
Okay, so I highly, you can get the book everywhere. If you have an independent bookstore around you, then please go get it from an independent bookstore in whichever city you are. But if you can't get it from an independent bookstore, then Amazon delivers. And if you don't like reading, like so many of my friends do, you can buy it on Audible. So it's available the book has dropped like a Beyonce album. It's in paper, it's in Kindle, it's in Audible, whatever format, it's a versatile book, let's just say. So whichever way you want it, it's available.
Brilliant. Okay, so I think everyone watching this has to get a copy. I mean, there is just no two ways about it. So the last, I think, question that I just had at the top of my head hearing the discussion, and this is for all three of you, would be, do you feel that corporate India, because hearing the discussion, it seems that corporate India is changing a lot of the narratives, even for our own version of LGBTQIA plus inclusion, as compared to the rest of the world. So we, all of us in sort of positions of power, have sort of changed the conversations to, be it gender equality, be it trans inclusion in the workplace, be it intersectionality, and we've all, I think, at least on this panel, have taken cognizance of the different shapes and of our own community. Do you feel that corporate India is going to show the way for further equality than legal India? And where we are in terms of equality, in terms of now this is of course more for the LGBT community, because in paper there are a lot of rights available for trans community, but even there, Zainab, do you feel that when it's larger societal change, be it legality as well as societal change, do you think corporate India is the beacon for the rest of society to see this?
Keshav, I totally believe that corporate India was leading, is leading, and is going to be the change maker. Let me give you a small example from KPMG on this one. That in the same-sex partner insurance that we rolled out, we have more LBT women accessing it than our gay men or gender non-conforming people actually accessing this. So that is, number one, a good sign. Also in terms of parental leave or in terms of caregiving leave or spousal benefits, they're way ahead than the curve in terms of what's going to happen in the legal spaces. You know, the legal or the political battle is going to be an extremely long drawn process, which might not even bear fruit considering the socio-legal, social condition, political condition that my country and your country is going through at the moment. Very difficult to find myself in that entire spectrum of voices that are going out. And, this is something that I tell in every show, that in this entire cacophony of sounding nationalist and being certified as nationalist, the most truest thing that you can do to yourself, the most nationalist thing that you can do to yourself, is being your true self, even if you identify as LGBTIQ person, because no one can take that away from you, and you certainly do not need anyone's certification to do that. So while corporate India is actually working on this, I feel it is people within corporate India, allies or LGBTIQ folks like us, who are working behind the scenes to make sure that at least the road in corporate inclusion is going to be at least a couple of thousand meters ahead in the rat race for LGBTIQ inclusion.
Keshav, whether Indian corporates can be the beacon towards a more just, equitable, fair future, I think they can be. I certainly think they will be more vocal than legal or political. Maybe not legal, but definitely political. But will they in fact do it? Will the corporations do the hard work? And it all depends on us, and then how much energy and momentum we are able to gather, and how many straight allies. I think we will have to push push very hard to win this fight. I don't think the older men are going to give up so easily, because they do feel that it's a new world, and what is their place in it if we do give up some power or share the power. So we'll have to fight hard. It won't be given on a platter.
Yeah, so I actually think that while corporate India is an important node, as I write in the book also, that we are part of, multiple nodes. And I think the future is going to have, the LGBTQ movement in India is going to progress on several fronts. I think the courts are certainly going to be one important space, right? And in courts, there are, I think, three broad things. I mean, one is, maybe a more progressive trans act than the one that exists. The second is, anti-discrimination legislation, comprehensive. And the third is marriage equality. And all three are things that various people in the queer movement want. I think we in the queer movement should understand that just in the past, because we've had like one legal victory after the other, doesn't mean that we can't simultaneously pursue multiple things in the courts, because all three might be important to different aspects of queer people. So I think we also have to widen our pie and think that we can ask for all the rights together, and they don't have to be linear. And I think legally it's going to progress on that. And I think these are going to be important conversations in the public. I think society is going to play a very important part, whether it's the media, whether it's the public sphere, how we can generate, momentum towards us in the public sphere for all of this. And I think here, I think media is going to play a very important role, which is why I'm so glad to see, whether it's television, whether it's news, whether it's, the Netflix and Amazon Primes of the world, so much more, a range of queer content coming out, talking about, queer possibilities, and not just in English or Hindi, but in Tamil, in Marathi, in so many wonderful languages across our country, right? I also think that schools and colleges are going to play a more and more important role. And we're seeing this throughout as well, right? Whether it's so many progressive colleges having gender neutral hostels, like this in Mumbai, for example. So many schools now, including the Godrej International in Delhi and so many others, having LGBTQ clubs in their, for 8th to 12th grade students and so on. So I think corporate India is an important node, simply because, the workplace is where people come, at least in our country, because we're studying until we keep on studying, and then we pop into a workplace. So it is the place where we kind of become who we are, but we can't do the heavy lifting without the support of of mainstream society, of the media, of our friends who will be doing the legal battles, of all the incredible activists all around the country who have been struggling for decades, right, to bring us to this position. So I think, but what we have is we have visibility, we have power, we have influence. And because all over the world now we are living in, you know, everywhere, it's like neoliberal capitalism. I think if we make suggestions to state or the national government, they will be taken seriously, which is why, I mean, to me, what we are all doing with FICCI is fundamental, right? Because when FICCI makes a petition, or when CII, or when, you know, any body such as this goes and talks to other institutions of power as a collective, that's also how you shift the needle in terms of policy and acceptance and all of this. So I think, you know, it's corporate India plus everyone else. I want to thank everyone for coming here, for reading, for sharing your thoughts. You know, Queeristan is both, I think, as Radhika said, was it Radhika? Yeah, I think as Radhika said, it's both a celebration of what is, but also very much, it tells you about the long road ahead that we all have to walk on. So 2 years after the 377 verdict, as we celebrate, I just want us to be very cautious, you know, celebrate cautiously and optimistically, recognizing that we have come a long way, but there's so much more to do. And for everyone who's watching, you know, please join us, whether you're queer, whether you're straight, you know, it really doesn't matter. You know, join us in solidarity, and let's all create a better and more inclusive India together.